Mario Kart 8. Wah!
Mario Kart 8!
I've been playing this game competitively for about a year now, and as such, I'm always finding new techniques to absolutely crush my opponents. So I decided to make a video about it, just to refresh me of all these things, both big and small, and hopefully to help you be able to crush your own opponents, which is likely to be your own family, as no one really plays this game competitively. I gotta assume you, as the viewer, know nothing about the best-selling game on the Nintendo Switch as of 2021. So let's start with the basics. Mario Kart 8 is, for all intents and purposes, a racing game published by Nintendo in 2014 for the Wii U. But because of the Wii U's poor performance, it was re-released in 2017 as Mario Kart 8 Deluxe for the Nintendo Switch. This is the game we're covering here today because, as mentioned before, it's the more popular version. This game got a recent update and DLC for double the original courses, as well as additional characters to race with. We won't be covering too much of the new DLC, partly because it's still not done releasing as of making this video, and because I'm not familiar with it myself. Now, with the history out of the way, the gameplay of Mario Kart consists of racing along some pretty wild tracks and trying to pass as many of your fellow racers as you can to reach first. Pretty standard stuff for a racing game, I've gotta say. You can choose from 4 different speeds: 50cc, 100cc, 150cc, and the ultra-fast 200cc. There's also Mirror, which is 150cc, but everything is flipped horizontally. It's kind of strange. Controls consist of go forward with A or Y, brake/reversing with B, steering with either the D-pad or joysticks, and using items, which is ZL and L. The more advanced controls include drifting, which is ZR and R, and looking rear view, which is X. There are a couple things you can do before a race even starts to get a leg up on your opponent. Choosing your kart combination. Choosing a character doesn't really matter in the long run, unless you're facing an opponent of equal skill level. So just know that choosing a character doesn't really matter. It affects weight, but we'll get into that in a bit, but it's a pretty trivial stat. Moving on to the kart combinations, this is the actually important part. You'll unlock karts as you collect more coins during races, so if you're just starting out, you're already at a disadvantage. Try to rack up as many coins as you can early game so you can unlock more kart options that you will then use to dominate your opponents. Each combination will affect different stats of your player. Just so you know, the other stats to keep in mind are traction, which will determine how slippery your controls feel, handling, which determines how you handle turning, and weight, which really only determines how far you get pushed away when getting rammed by someone, acceleration, which is how quickly you get up to max speed, and speed, which determines your max speed. You can press either plus or minus to bring these stats up on the kart selection screen. Out of these stats, one might say speed is the most important factor. But this is actually a trap many people can fall into. The real most important stat is actually acceleration, as this is going to help you bounce back from hits and falls like nothing, because you are going to get hit over and over and over. It's the essence of Mario Kart. The kart combination that maxes out acceleration is this, and the glider doesn't really affect all that much. It does affect a little, but honestly, you could swap it out for anything aesthetically pleasing and you'd be a-okay. There's also some other features to adjust on this screen, which include these 3 nodes here. The rightmost one is the auto forward feature, which basically makes you go automatically forward, even if you're not pressing your go forward button. Honestly, you can turn this on if you want. The only downside is that it's harder to come to a complete stop, which you probably won't need to worry about in races. The middle one is just whether or not you want motion controls. You do not want motion controls. Just trust me on that. The final leftmost node is for assist mode to be on, represented by this antenna-looking thing at the back of your kart. This you really only want on if you're still learning to play the game. What it does is it makes it really difficult for players to run off cliffs or go off-road. But the trade-off is that it makes it harder to take shortcuts because most of them require you to go off-road, and you can't use Ultra Mini Turbo Boost, which, again, we'll get into later. Plus, you will get shamed for using it with people who are even somewhat competent at the game. You won't need it as you play more and more, but for early stages of playing, you'll probably want it to keep up with other players. To sum up the kart selections, aim for acceleration, do not use motion controls, and only use assist mode if you're new to the game. With that in mind, we're finally ready to head to the actual racing part of this. First things first, at the beginning of a race, you'll have a countdown before you can start moving. However, you can actually hold down the A/Y button before this, and if you time it right, you can get a small boost at the beginning of a race. You want to aim for when the 2 stops moving down from the screen, and start pressing the go as soon as that, and it will give you the biggest boost. Be careful though, as doing it too early can cause you to stall, putting you in dead last if you weren't already before. It's completely okay if you miss this extra boost, as there's plenty of time to catch up, the entire race in fact, but it's helpful to know nonetheless. Now, there's a couple different directions I could take this guide from here, but I think the most important technique to know going into a race is this. Drift, 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 drift. Drifting is the centerpiece of Mario Kart, aside from the items, and if you don't drift, you are not going to do as well as you can. Drifting is certainly hard at first, but as you keep playing and practicing it, you'll fall into a rhythm and it'll become second nature. Drifting allows you to cut corners more quickly and most importantly, gives you a mini boost. I mentioned this earlier, but when drifting you can get 3 levels of mini boost, represented by different colored sparks coming off your wheel. Mini turbo boost, shown by blue sparks, give you a small boost. Super mini turbo boost, shown by orange sparks, give you a slightly longer boost. And ultra mini boosts, shown by purple sparks, give you a pretty decently long boost. The longer you drift consecutively determines which of these boosts you'll get when you let go of the drift button, Z, R, or R. These boosts, even small ones, can really help you get ahead. I cannot stress enough how important drifting is in Mario Kart 8. Next, since we're not going through each of the 48 courses individually, I'm going to go over some general rules of thumb into going into courses. When coming to a wide turn area like this, it might be tempting to go along the far end and hit the speed boosts. But the faster way is actually to hug along the inner wall and follow along there. This goes for all turns of this nature. Keep off rough terrain, which is roughly speaking anything that's not the main track, as this will make you go significantly slower. The only exception to this is if you have a mushroom in your item slot, in which case you should absolutely use it to boost through the rough terrain, because you will not only not slow down, you will also skip a small portion of the track. Speaking of mushrooms, if you get the triple mushroom, do not, and I repeat, do not use them all at once. You should space them out so that your boosting goes for longer, and not boosting for the equivalent of just one mushroom. You can even see the difference in these here clips right here. One with just doing it all at the same time, and one with just doing it spread out. Same goes for the triple shells and bananas, as sometimes these items can accidentally hit each other, and now suddenly there's only one of these items to use to you, instead of, all 3. Finally, pressing ZR or R, right as you go over a ramp or ledge, you'll get a small boost as you land back on the track. This is also very helpful to know, as it's an extra way to get some speed during a race. This is actually a pretty important technique. I probably should have mentioned that earlier. Just try to do this as often as you can in a game. This video is getting longer and more in-depth than I realized, so I'm gonna wrap this up with one final technique, which is shell direction. It has to do with the red and green shell, obviously, and it also works with the banana, just in a slightly different way. When shooting a shell with ZL or L, it'll launch forward and off into the distance, but sometimes there's a threat to your placement behind you, which is especially true when you're in first. Holding back on your joystick and then shooting your shell will cause it to fly behind you instead of in front, able to knock out your opponent before they get too close to you. With bananas, the same logic can be applied, and while holding up on your joystick, you can launch the banana in front of you instead of being laid behind you. Just make sure you don't accidentally run into it immediately. You can hold X to look rear view, so you can aim your shell at someone specific, but be careful of this as well, as you won't be able to see what's in front of you, and therefore you might hit a wall. But there you have it, some tips and tricks to hopefully get you better at Mario Kart and be able to crush your brother and make him cry from how well you were able to beat him. I wish I could have gone over more, but nonetheless, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Bye!